by making sure every American has the ability to have a good-paying job so they can feed their families and achieve their part of the American dream. Thank you, Mr. President.
Mr. President, I wonder if I could make a parliamentary inquiry.
The senator from California.
Just to make sure, because Senator Roberts and I had a conversation. He has gotten some time, I think, from Senator Cruz. Is that correct? Senator Heitkamp wanted to make a couple of comments for a couple of minutes following Senator Stabenow. So this is what I would ask. After Senator Heitkamp is recognized, I would be recognized. If Senator Cruz comes, I will stop at that time and yield the time over to Senator Cruz and then continue after he is finished, if that's all right. Thank you. That would be a consent.
Is there objection?
Reserving the right to object, and I'm not going to object. Senator, I don't know what's keeping Senator Cruz, but my remarks only take 4 minutes to identify myself with his effort on Benghazi. I know Senator Inhofe would like to say just a few words. Perhaps we could start, although he does have the time. I think I also have time reserved. I think it's a joint effort, so perhaps I could start.
Well, if I could just say, I'm happy to allow that to go forward, but there needs to be a definite time. How much time will all three senators? My understanding was it was Senator Cruz for how many minutes?
I think it was 15 minutes.
So
of
if the senator is asking that he take Senator Cruz's 15 minutes, I have no objection.
Well, I'm not going to take all of the 15 minutes if the senator would yield.
If the senator is asking that he take part of Senator Cruz's 15 minutes and it count against the Senator Cruz's time, I've got no problem with that whatsoever. Is that all right? So I would revise to say that Senator Heitkamp would be going for 3 minutes, Senator Roberts would be going for 5 minutes, and then I would be recognized.
Is there objection?
Right to object. It's a 15-minute slot that we had intended, and I am sure that the senators will arrive at least someday.
When Senator Cruz arrives to take the additional 10 minutes, that's fine.
Why don't you let Heitkamp
I will do that.
And we'll work it out.
Is that all right with Senator? So in other words, Senator takes 5 minutes, Senator Cruz comes, and I would yield to him for the rest of the 10 minutes. Because he's not here, so.
I withdraw any objection.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear what you said.
I withdraw any objection.
Okay. All right.
Without objection, so ordered. The senator from North Dakota.
Mr. President, I will be very brief, recognizing the other urgent business that the Senate needs to address. But I did want to associate myself with the remarks of the very able and capable chairwoman of the Ag Committee, Senator Stabenow. We have a disaster in the making. It's called the Farm Bill. Months ago, this body passed a comprehensive farm bill recognizing a 50-year compromise, a 50-year association of nutrition assistance with the ability to provide disaster assistance for our farmers in this country. For 50 years, that effort has served us very well. Today in the House of Representatives and this week in the House of Representatives, they will do something that is unprecedented for 50 years. They will segregate, pass separate bills, and do, I think, a disservice to struggling, unemployed, underemployed American families, and that is dramatically reduce the food stamp allocation. Food stamps are there when people need them, the same way that farm disaster payments are there when farmers need them. Anyone who thinks that someone is living kind of high on the hog, so to speak, on food stamps needs to spend time with people who are trying to make it work and feed their families on $1.40 per meal. And we know that with the recovering economy, we are going to see a dwindling number of those folks move off. But yet we see this move almost in a way that is going to challenge this long-term relationship that has basically enabled a great partnership between many of our urban and rural legislators and senators and members of the House of Representatives, but also something that speaks to the very important value that we have, which is that kids ought not to go hungry in this country. That's not who we are. We are not a country that allows children and families who are working, in many cases, to go hungry. And that when they need that help, that temporary help that they've been receiving, that they ought to get it. Because it makes sense. It makes them better citizens. It makes them better students. And it tells us that, yes, when times are very, very tough, as they have been for so many American families today, as times are very, very tough, we'll be there. Let's not let this happen. Let's fight back. Let's continue to have this conversation, and let's pass a comprehensive farm bill that recognizes the need to feed people as well as providing disaster assistance for farmers. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Senator from Kansas.
Mr. President, Senator Cruz is now on the floor, and he'll be speaking right after me, and this is sort of a tee-up kind of situation. In thanking Senator Cruz for his efforts to keep a focus on the Benghazi terrorist attack, it just seems to me to be a great shame that a year after the heinous attacks on our consulate in Benghazi and 4 Americans being murdered, and shaking the confidence, this is tremendously important, of our men and women deployed in service to this nation, that the United States would never leave anybody behind. I was told that when I joined the Marine Corps a long time ago. It is a great shame that we are still in the same place. Justice has yet to be seen or done. The families of those killed at the consulate in Benghazi are waiting for answers about what happened that night. And they simply want to know that this President and this administration are working to seek justice for what has actually happened. Yet it appears that what's happening is that the administration is doing everything but to seek justice. And quite frankly, I think Americans, and I share their concern and frustration and anger, are sick and tired of hearing excuses, delays, even silence. The President and his administration have stonewalled us on this case, in my personal view. Today, the FBI continues to seek tips from Libyans. This should have been called a terrorist attack a long time ago. The Intelligence Committee should be handling this, but that is not the case. Now, the FBI has even posted an entire page on their website dedicated to finding suspects. There are photos of 29 suspects on that page, 29 of them. No arrests have been made. CNN and the New York Times have even had access to one of the chief suspects, Ahmad Abu Khalada, access to interview him while he mocks the U.S. investigation. This is unbelievable. The administration refuses to answer simple questions, questions such as, who told the military to stand down? Who is responsible for misleading the American public and the victims' families? What actionable intelligence did our government have? I know what that is, and it was actionable intelligence. People asked for that security. Why was it ignored? This, it seems to me, why we need a joint select committee. At the very least, this deserves a vote. So I urge my colleagues blocking this legislation, please drop your hold. Let's at least have a vote on this. If you want to defeat it, but at least have the senator from Texas have an opportunity to introduce this amendment. Senator Cruz, thank you for introducing this legislation. I believe this should be a top priority for our government. I yield back any balance of time I have to the distinguished senator.
Mr. President.
The senator from Texas.
I thank my friend from Kansas for his leadership and for his reasonable call that we ascertain the truth on this very important matter. As we do every year, last week as a nation we mark the somber anniversary of the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001. For the first time this year, we also remembered the victims of Benghazi. Foreign Service Officer Sean Smith, former Navy SEALs Glenn Dougherty and Tyrone Woods, and Ambassador Christopher Stevens, who was our first ambassador murdered while serving since Adolph Dubs in 1979. The anniversary of the Benghazi attacks, however, should not simply be an act of remembrance. It should serve as a wake-up call. An entire year has gone by since these American heroes lost their lives in the service of our nation, and we still have far too many unanswered questions. Why was the State Department unwilling to provide the requested level of security in Benghazi? Why were no military assets mobilized while the attacks were going on, even if they might not arrive before the attacks were over? If then Secretary Panetta had, quote, no question in his mind that this was a coordinated terrorist attack while it was going on, why did Ambassador Rice, Secretary Clinton, and President Obama all tell the American people that the cause was a spontaneous demonstration about an Internet video in the days after September 11, 2012? Why did the State Department edit the intelligence talking points to delete the references to, quote, Islamic extremists and al-Qaeda? Why did the FBI not release pictures of militants taken the day of the attack and release them only 8 months after the fact? Why not immediately, as proved so effective in the Boston bombing last April? What role, if any, did the State Department's own counterterrorism office play during the attack in their immediate aftermath? Why have none of the survivors testified to Congress? And why do the Benghazi whistleblowers still fear retaliation and retribution? To get the answers to these questions, we need to hear from the survivors of the attack to gain first-hand understanding of what happened that night. We need to ensure that the whistleblowers on Benghazi can tell their stories without fear of reprisals. We need the President to make good on his promise of September 12, 2012, quote, to bring justice to the killers who attacked our people. That still has yet to happen. Over the past year, it has become evident that we need a joint select committee to get these things, because we have an administration that is actively trying to avoid learning more about Benghazi. We have a former Secretary of State who responds to congressional inquiries about why we were attacked in Benghazi with, quote, what difference at this point does it make? We have a current Secretary of State who responds to congressional inquiries about why the administration deliberately misidentified the nature of the attack by saying that he does not want to spend a whole year, quote, coming up here talking about Benghazi in Congress. We have a White House press secretary who responds to press inquiries about difficulties interviewing the survivors by simply dismissing Benghazi as something that, quote, happened a long time ago. And we have a president who complains that, quote, phony scandals are distracting him from his domestic agenda, by which, his press secretary clarified the next day, he meant the IRS targeting and Benghazi. In addition, we have seen in recent weeks an escalating pattern of obstruction by the administration into any investigation into Benghazi and a reluctance to take any action to retaliate against the attack or to prevent a future episode. On August 14th, there were press reports that the team of special operators who were in Libya to track down those responsible for the Benghazi attack were being pulled out despite repeated recommendations for action, some as recent as August 7th. On August 20th, we learned that the only disciplinary actions taken after Benghazi would be reversed as the 4 State Department employees who had been placed on administrative leave after the attacks were reinstated. On August 23rd, the State Department said it was, quote, not prepared to allow the Benghazi survivors to testify to Congress, a denial that was reportedly reiterated by Secretary of State John Kerry on September 10th. On September 11th, we learned from the State Department's own internal review that the department is, quote, lagging behind in implementing the new security measures recommended after the Benghazi attack, with, for example, only 100 of the recommended 1,000 Marines being deployed for potential hotspots. On September 15th, we learned of serious allegations in a draft House Committee for Oversight and Government report that the Accountability Review Board report requested by Secretary Clinton whitewashed the responsibility of senior State Department officials for the decisions that resulted in the lack of proper security at Benghazi facilities. And just today, at a House Foreign Affairs Committee hearing, Undersecretary of State for Management Patrick Kennedy admitted that the FBI investigation in Benghazi has ground to an indefinite halt because of the security situation in Libya. Mr. Kennedy also asserted in this hearing that the reassignment of 4 State Department employees represented, quote, serious accountability for the 4 Americans who died in Benghazi. This state of affairs, in a word, is unacceptable. Truth is not partisan, and every member of this body should want to ascertain what happened. Given the year-long collective failure of our government either to gain clarity on what happened in Benghazi on September 11th or to extract any retribution for the terrorist attack, Congress should now form a joint select committee to launch a proper investigation. The attacks on our diplomatic facilities in Benghazi are part of a larger threat we have faced for the last 12 years from radical Islamic terrorism. We cannot let this anniversary pass with just, quote, a thought, a hope, a prayer, or a wish, as Secretary Kerry recommended in an all-staff email to the State Department regarding the Benghazi attack. We need a chief counsel who can systematically ascertain the truth and can follow the actual facts of what happened that night to their full and logical conclusion wherever that may lie, so that we can honor these American heroes and we can ensure that we're doing everything we can to prevent this sort of attack from ever happening again. If we refuse to seek the answers to these questions, then we are inviting future tragedies. We have 4 dead Americans. It has been a full year. My co-sponsors on this recommendation and I have had enough without answers and without the truth. I therefore ask unanimous consent the Rules Committee be discharged from further consideration of Senate Resolution 225, that the Senate proceed to its consideration, that the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be made and laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Is there objection?
I object, and I would like to explain why, if that would be appropriate for the next 2 minutes, if I could.
Objection is heard. The senator may proceed.
Thank you. I'm proud to be on the Foreign Relations Committee for many years, and this Benghazi tragedy occurred, and the Foreign Relations Committee held hours of hearings. I sat through those hearings, and I want to say to my friends, I share their dismay that we haven't caught the perpetrators, but I want to remind them that the president who caught Osama bin Laden, who killed so many of our people, was President Obama, and when he says he's going to do something, he won't rest until he does it. Now, Secretary Clinton immediately called for an accountability review board, and that accountability review board was not partisan. And what my colleague wants to do is set up some kind of committee filled with politicians, of which I happen to be proud that I'm one, but I put more faith, frankly, in the professionalism and the nonpartisanship of the Accountability Review Board. Who headed that Accountability Review Board? Ambassador Thomas Pickering, who was first picked for public service under the first George Bush, and Admiral Michael Mullen, former head of the Joint Chief of Staff. Now, there are many other reasons why I oppose this. Secretary Kerry has addressed this and continues to address it. We had 2 classified briefings. The Intelligence Committee is preparing to release a bipartisan support on the events that occurred in Benghazi. And last December, Homeland Security released a bipartisan report on the security deficiencies. And the good news is, of course, as a result of this tragedy, changes have been made all over the world. So I sense there's politics here. You know, I sense there's politics here. And I don't think it's right to inject politics into such a tragedy. and therefore I object.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oklahoma.
Yeah, well, I can't disagree with her that there are politics here. This is the United States Senate. But let me say one thing. I strongly support this amendment. Let me ask, in the order of things right now, does the senator from Texas still have the floor? Oh, all right. Then I ask.
Senator from Oklahoma has the floor.
Very good, very good. I appreciate that. You know, one thing as I read this resolution that my good friend Senator Cruz has, I thought it really doesn't go far enough, because I think all people are talking about now is how can you preclude this from happening again, what happened and all that. To me, that's not even the issue. The issue is the cover-up. I mean, you know, I sat there as the ranking member of this Senate Armed Services Committee, and I watched the day that this happened, 9/11. Then, of course, the annex came right after that. That was 9/12, the next day. When that happened, there was never any doubt but what that was an organized attack, a terrorist attack. Never any doubt. Now, we all know, I happen to know Chris Stevens. He was in my office right before he deployed to go over there. He was telling me in my office how dangerous it was over there. He said, you know, there are threats. There's terrorist threats. Al-Qaeda has a presence over there, and we don't have a lot of security. And he started requesting security. This is a long time before this happened. And I've got all the dates. I didn't bring them down with me because it'd be redundant. I've been in the record so many times that he knew that this was happening. And we knew that there was this kind of activity in that part of the world, and he wanted to do something about it, offer more security. Well, he's dead now. And he knew what he was getting into at that time. And when the threats came for what happened on 9/11, people were aware of that. You remember the Brits? They left, and several others just up and left because they knew what kind of threat was out there. So anyway, what we did right after 9/11, and it's just a matter of hours after that they attacked the annex. Now, they can't say for certainty that the original attack was organized. I think it was an organized terrorist attack. But they can say with certainty, and I won't use my words, I'll use their words, it was unequivocal that we knew at that time it was an organized terrorist attack. I remember when Secretary Panetta came forward and he said that he used the same word, unequivocal. Then the NSC chief Brennan, at that time, that was his job. He said, sitting in my office, and then again before a hearing, that it was unequivocal. We knew that it was an organized terrorist, Al-Qaeda-related attack. We knew it. Now, the cover-up is this, and I've studied cover-ups for a long time. The Iran-Contra, I went all the way through that. I remember that well. The Pentagon Papers, Watergate. All of these things were cover-ups. But this one, where 5 days after all of our people and the top security people knew it was an organized attack, to send Secretary Rice to the talk shows to say, for purely political reasons, and cover up the reality of it, that this was due to some video. So I only say this, that I would like to pursue this in terms of the cover-up, which is really not covered in the resolution that we're discussing right now. I think it should be, it should have been. I was not a part of drafting it. I strongly support it. I know where we're coming from here, and I think we need to get to the bottom of it, and all the questions need to be answered. But the big thing that needs to be discussed, that nobody likes to talk about, is the cover-up. So with that, I will yield the floor.
Mr. President.
A senator from New Jersey.
Mr. President, I appreciate my colleague from the Foreign Relations Committee having already objected, but, you know, I just want to make a few remarks because there are those, regardless of what is reviewed, regardless of who comes forth, regardless of all the information, who want to keep this alive for whatever is ultimately election purposes. And I know the next presidential election is a few years away, but it seems that it's very alive today in the United States Senate. Look, I am always for getting to the truth, particularly when the lives of American diplomats have been lost. And that's an honorable pursuit. But by the same token, from my perspective, and let me say why I'm going to have this perspective. My perspective is that we had two of the most outstanding individuals in Ambassador Pickering and Admiral Mullen. Certainly no one questions their integrity. At least I haven't heard their integrity be questioned here on the Senate floor. They conducted the Accountability Review Board. And in the process, they yielded 29 recommendations that are, in fact, being implemented, that our committee has continued to pursue oversight on in the Senate Foreign Relations. We've held 2 hearings. We've had multiple high-level briefings, including intelligence briefings, bringing in all of the respective parties that are responsible here together. And in fact, we had the former Secretary of State before the committee, a hearing that I chaired at the time, who addressed all of these issues. We had before that former Chairman Kerry, now Secretary Kerry, held a hearing of the committee on the events that transpired with Deputy Secretary Burns and Nyes. And we had 2 classified briefings on December 13th and 19th, specifically on the circumstances surrounding the attack. In those classified briefings, we had the key individuals who could get us to the truth. I understand the Intelligence Committee is presenting a bipartisan report on the events that occurred in Benghazi. Last December, the Senate Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Chairman at the time, Senator Lieberman, and Ranking Member Collins released a bipartisan report on the security deficiencies at the temporary U.S. mission in Benghazi that led to the deaths of those 4 Americans, including our Ambassador Chris Stevens. The House has conducted its own hearings and investigations, and yet we have those who want to continue to pursue this despite all of these different efforts independently of the Senate, between the House, the Accountability Review Board. Now, you know, there is a lot of culpability, and maybe there's cover-up in a different sense. The cover-up is a Congress that doesn't want to put the money where it's necessary to ultimately take the high-risk, high-threat posts in this country and ultimately protect them. It's nice to talk about, you know, who's responsible. Let's talk about who is also responsible in terms of obligations. We have over 30 high-risk, high-threat posts in the world right now, as we speak on the Senate floor, that are at risk and that do not meet the present security standards. And yet the Congress seems to move ever so slowly towards getting to the resources that would accelerate the pace on which we create the physical and other protections for those high-threat, high-risk posts. And that, of course, is the 30 that exist today. And we know from history that, in fact, what exists today as a high-risk, high-threat post, tomorrow there could be another one on the list. And so we have diplomats who not only are at institutions that don't meet the present standards, and yet at the pace that we're going, based upon the appropriations of this Senate, we would find ourselves a decade from now dealing with just those 30 posts. Now, I'd like to see the members who don't seem to be willing to put their vote for the security of diplomats abroad when the next attack comes, and inevitably, unfortunately, in the world in which we live in, that is very possible, that didn't put their resources to accelerate the pace where maybe we would have succeeded at preventing injuries or death. So let's be honest about this process. Yes, there was a process that ultimately led to a series of recommendations. The legislation that the committee has ultimately reported out in a bipartisan basis, working with Senator Corker, the ranking Republican on the committee, would deal with these challenges. It would deal with language issues. It would deal with the funding issue. It would deal with the diplomatic security preparation where we have scattered across a whole bunch of institutions that don't meet the goal. It would deal with all of these elements. It would create greater accountability. And you know what else it would do? It would let the Secretary of State have the ability to ultimately fire those individuals who might be found derelict in their duty, which is not presently on the law the ability for the Secretary to pursue. So let's move that legislation, and I hope my colleagues are going to support that as we move forward to try to find the success that we want in making sure that our diplomats across the globe are as safe as humanly possible as they advocate America's national economic interests, its national interests, its national security interests, still always facing a risk, but minimizing those risks to the greatest example. If not, then I certainly believe that the garish light of attention should be cast upon the institution of the Congress, which is not meeting its responsibility as it relates to our diplomats abroad. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Oklahoma.
Mr. President, I ask as consent that I be acknowledged as if in morning business.
Is there objection?
Objection.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President, we have had a very carefully constructed list here of who would speak, and so I wonder how long the senator wishes to be recognized for.
Well, I do want to accommodate the senator from California. But I actually have 3 different subjects I want to talk on. Let me talk on one very brief. Then I'll go on to...
How much time does my friend need to talk about his first subject?
9.5 minutes.
9.5 minutes. Well, then what was going to happen was I was going to speak next. Now I'll give my place up so that Senator Murray can speak, followed by Senator Coons, followed by Senator Inhofe for 9.5 minutes. I don't know how many minutes my friend needs. 5? How many minutes my friend needs? 15? 12? So, and then I would follow, following Senator Inhofe's 9.5. Is that right?
Objection?
Yes, is that a unanimous consent request?
Yes, it is.
That you be followed by the senator from Washington?
No, I'll do it again.
Do it
Can you
again.
read back
The
consent?
senator from California.
Yeah. The consent I made was that we would go to Senator Murray for 12 minutes. We would go to Senator Coons then for 5 minutes. We would go to Senator Inhofe for 9.5 minutes. And then I would get to go for about 10 minutes.
Okay.
Objection?
Well, point of inquiry. Is this after I speak now, or does that start now?
No.
In other words, you will have 4 Democrats before I will
No,
speak.
2.
Well, you already had 1, and then you have Senator Coons and...
Well, we had a number on there, so I just tried.
Yeah.
Well, you had quite a few on your side.
Well, okay.
You had
Well,
3.
all right.
You had 3, one after the other, and now we're going to have 3, and then it goes back.
Oh, okay. Well, reserving the right to object. If you'll take 2 of them now, let me speak, and then you can have 2 of them after that. That's still 2 to 1. Okay?
That's what I said. I said Senator Murray, Senator Coons, Senator Inhofe, Senator Boxer. That's what I said. Is that all right?
Is there objection? Without objection.
President.
The senator from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I thank my colleague from California for accommodating all of us. I really appreciate it. Mr. President, let me start today just by joining my colleagues who've been out here on the floor expressing my deepest condolences to the families of those who lost someone in Monday's tragic shooting. I know that the thoughts and prayers of the nation are with those who are still recovering, and I know I speak for my constituents in Washington State in thanking the law enforcement community here in Washington, D.C., who put their lives on the line every day to protect our families and workers here in the nation's capital. We don't have all the answers to the many questions a tragedy like this raises, but those questions will continue to be asked, and I'm hopeful that the answers will help our nation heal and guide our continued work to prevent these kinds of tragedies in the future. Mr. President, I'm here today because, like many of my colleagues, I spent this past August traveling around my home state and meeting with my constituents. I heard from Washington State families about a wide range of issues facing our nation, but the one sentiment that I heard over and over again from every part of my state was they were sick and tired of the constant lurching from crisis to crisis. They told me how disappointed and disgusted they were that every time they turned on their televisions over the past few years and saw another story about Congress hurtling towards another artificial deadline, hurting our economy and causing more uncertainty for our businesses. They told me they want Congress to work together. They want us to focus on the economy. They want us to put our country and our families that we represent before partisanship and political games. And, Mr. President, I couldn't agree more. Like them, I am frustrated that we seem to be now, once again, headed towards another completely avoidable, completely unnecessary, self-inflicted crisis. You know, it has now been 179 days since this Senate and the House passed our budgets. When the Senate budget passed, I was optimistic that because both Republicans and Democrats said they wanted to return to regular order, we might be able to get back to a responsible process. At that time, we had 192 days to reach a bipartisan budget agreement, and I thought the next step would be a budget conference, where the two sides would get in a room, hash out our differences, and we would work together towards a deal. But, as we all know, some of our Republican colleagues had other ideas. They immediately seemed to regret their push for a Senate budget, and they started running away from a debate as quickly as they could. I came here to the Senate floor with my colleagues a total of 18 times to ask for consent to start a budget conference with the House. But every time we tried, Mr. President, a member of the Tea Party here in the Senate, backed by Republican leaders, stood up and blocked us. Instead of using the months we had to work out a compromise, Republicans seemed to think it was in their best interest somehow to stall as long as possible under some misguided theory that a crisis would give them more leverage. Now, Mr. President, I had hoped my Republican colleagues had spent their time back home talking to their constituents and would be ready to come back to D.C. and get to work on a balanced and bipartisan budget deal. But sadly, the opposite has happened. Now, while I believe that the majority of Republicans are interested in working with us as Democrats to get to a fair budget deal, a few of my Republican colleagues spent the summer riling up the Tea Party and making them promises they couldn't keep. And since Republican leaders know they need to find a way to avoid another crisis that would be blamed on them, a full-scale civil war has broken out within the Republican Party. They are in disarray. They're having trouble figuring out how to pull themselves out from the hole they've climbed into. And while we wait for Republicans to join us at the table, the Tea Party is pushing our country closer and closer to a government shutdown, and closer to what would be a catastrophic default on our loans. Well, why are they doing this? Not because they're concerned about the budget, not because they are interested in jobs or economic growth. To them, it seems it's all about Obamacare. Everything they're doing now, they are doing in order to cut off health care coverage for 25 million people, to end access to free preventive health care, to cause seniors to pay more for their prescriptions, to cut off young adults from their coverage, to bring back lifetime coverage caps and let patients with pre-existing conditions be denied care, put the insurance companies back in charge of our health care system, and so much more. You know, Mr. President, these political games might play well with the Tea Party base, but here's the reality. Obamacare is the law of the land. It passed through this Senate with a supermajority. It passed through the House. The President signed it into law. This Supreme Court upheld it. It's already helping millions of Americans stay healthy and financially secure, and it is on track to help millions more. And, Mr. President, when I see some of my colleagues working so hard to defend Obamacare, I have to wonder whether they've taken the time to meet some of their own constituents who are already benefiting from this law. Now, just this last month, I was home in Washington State, and I met an incredible woman named Nikki Mackey, who lives in Seattle. On September 16th of 2010, Nikki was diagnosed with an extremely aggressive form of breast cancer, 36 years old, terrified of what this disease would do to her. And to make matters worse, instead of focusing on her treatment, she had to worry about her coverage. And that's because just a few months before her diagnosis, in the midst of the recession, Nikki had been laid off from her job. So there she was, with her coverage at risk and years of treatment ahead of her. But thanks to Obamacare, a law some of my colleagues want to undermine at any cost, Nikki will never have to worry about reaching a lifetime cap. And she will never have to worry about not getting coverage due to her now pre-existing condition. And, Mr. President, that is why we have worked so hard to pass this law, because it says now in America, you shouldn't go broke just because you get sick. And you shouldn't be denied care simply because you can't afford it. So let's be very clear about what's happening here and the political calculation that some of my colleagues have made. They've decided they're willing to play politics with Americans' health care. They've decided it's better for them to sabotage this law rather than improve it, and they've decided that beyond all that, they're also willing to devastate our nation's economy to kill this law. Well, Mr. President, we're not going to let that happen. Mr. President, Nikki told me that when she turns on her TV and sees members of Congress using every trick in the book to kill this law, she feels, quote, her own well-being is under attack. So, Mr. President, I want to be clear. Democrats are not going to defund or delay health care reform. It's not going to happen. We should be all working together right now to make sure it is implemented in the best possible way for our families and our businesses and our communities. And we certainly are certainly very interested in hearing from anyone, Democrat or Republican, who has good ideas about how the law could be improved. But we are not going to allow the health care of Nikki or millions of other Americans be used as a pawn in a political game. We are not going to let this law get sabotaged as it continues to benefit millions of families and small business owners. And the sooner Republicans realize this, the sooner we can get to work diffusing this latest artificial crisis. Mr. President, we know the families we represent don't support the Republicans' sabotage tactics. Recent polls show fewer than 1 in 4 people support efforts to make health care reform fail, and that a majority believe we in Congress should be trying to make the law work. It's also very clear that Americans would rightly blame Republicans if the government shuts down, especially over an issue like this. And a lot of Republicans know that. My colleague, Senator Johanns, said these defunding and delaying efforts have, quote, zero chance of being successful. Senator Burr said, and I quote, the dumbest idea I've ever heard of. House Republican leaders know this, too. That's why they introduced a bill last week that would allow government funding to pass while giving House Republicans a vote to defund health care that has no chance of becoming law. But as we know now, the Tea Party wasn't interested in that. They don't want a show vote. They want a shutdown. And they're going to keep fighting until they get it. So, Mr. President, we now have less than 2 weeks before the end of this fiscal year and a potential government shutdown. It is a shame that we've gotten to this point, but we're here. We owe it to the American people to come together, find a solution and a path forward that is good for our economy and fair for our middle class. My goal has been and will continue to be a long-term budget agreement that replaces sequestration, tackles our debt and deficit responsibly, and invests in our workers and our economy. But since it seems clear that the House won't be able to get its act together in the next few weeks, the least they should be able to do is send us a clean, short-term extension of the current budget levels so government doesn't shut down while we continue to negotiate on this longer-term budget deal. So, Mr. President, I want to be clear about something. Democrats are not going to negotiate over whether or not Congress should allow the federal government to pay its bills. As Speaker Boehner said in the past, default would be, quote, a financial disaster not just for us, but for the worldwide economy. Republicans need to take those words to heart and stop threatening the economic recovery with their saber-rattling and brinksmanship. You know, we went through this earlier this year, and back then, after spending months saying they wouldn't raise the debt limit unless they got dollar-for-dollar spending cuts, Republicans dropped their demands, dropped the so-called Boehner rule, and allowed the debt ceiling to be increased. Going back now to that reckless approach of 2011 and drumming up this uncertainty again is nothing but a huge and harmful waste of time. So, Mr. President, it is ridiculous that we find ourselves on the brink of an artificial crisis again. We should be doing everything possible to support the economic recovery and help our workers get back on the job. We should be spending time finding common ground to tackle our long-term fiscal challenges responsibly, and we should be working together to build on the Affordable Care Act to continue improving our health care system for all of our families and small business owners. But as you know, we are now mired in the muck of perpetual partisanship and constant crisis. Mr. President, the American people deserve better. Nikki and the millions of families like hers deserve better. And I am really hopeful that the Republican leadership stops focusing so much on their extreme party minority and comes to the table with us to work on a balanced and bipartisan deal that the vast majority of Americans want. And I hope they don't make us reach a crisis to get to that point. Thank you, Mr. President. I yield the floor.
Mr. President.
The senator from Delaware.
Mr. President, I'd like to associate myself with the remarks of the Budget Committee Chair. As a member of the Budget Committee, I join her in expressing our strong view that this country does not need another shutdown. This country doesn't need another pointless fiscal cliff, but needs us to listen and to work together in this chamber and with the House of Representatives and move forward on the agenda that all of our constituents want us to proceed on. Mr. President, I rise today specifically to speak to the bill that is on the floor that has been the subject of debate and discussion as 1392, the Energy Savings and Industrial Competitiveness Act of 2013. This is a broadly bipartisan bill. Its two primary authors, my colleagues from New Hampshire and Ohio, Senators Shaheen and Portman, have worked tirelessly to make sure that it respects the priorities of members of both parties. Its passage by a vote of 19-3 out of the Energy Committee on which you serve speaks to its support across partisan lines. Yet sadly, now that it's on the floor, a few Republicans have decided they want to use it to carry out their own narrow or partisan political agendas, rather than showing our constituents and the American people that we can come together across our differences of region and party to pass this common sense bipartisan legislation. They'd rather confirm the frustration and even disgust so many of our constituents feel about this body. We were all home last month, Mr. President. We all heard from our constituents, and I don't know about my colleagues, but what I heard from Delawareans about what they want, what they deserve, is not more displays of selfish partisanship that frustrates them, but rather that we can listen to each other and work together on bipartisan bills that moves this country forward. Energy efficiency, the topic of this bill, the topic we should be moving forward on today, its only agenda is creating a stable, dynamic, and prosperous future. And the Shaheen-Portman bill really has been written with only that goal as its North Star. It's not about who's right or wrong, about whether climate change is real or not, about whose science you're going to choose to believe today. Energy efficiency is fundamentally something that makes sense. It allows us to bridge competing interests and concerns because it promotes energy independence, it helps our environment, and it promotes American jobs, jobs today and jobs tomorrow. When we need to purchase new equipment to promote the efficiency of our buildings, whether it's DuPont's Tyvek wrapping or Dow's foam spray insulation, both made here in America, we create good manufacturing jobs in our country. When we install new equipment, new energy-efficient equipment in homes and buildings, we hire Americans to do that work, sheet metal workers, electricians, laborers. And when we set voluntary new goals for efficiency, as this bill does, we incentivize the kind of research and innovation that will create jobs well into the future. It's simple. And, Mr. President, there's no reason we shouldn't be able to get this done. I come to this debate today as someone who has seen the power of energy efficiency up close in the private sector and public sector in my work in Delaware. When I was in the private sector more than 15 years ago, I came to understand that power when our then Governor Ruth Ann Minner appointed me to chair the Conservation and Efficiency Working Group of her Energy Task Force. Over 2 years of meetings, I grew to appreciate how powerful energy efficiency can be for the commercial and industrial balance sheet of our country. It later translated into my work as county executive of Newcastle County, Delaware, where I led a county-wide effort to make our buildings more energy efficient. We had old and energy wasteful buildings, and we knew that by investing in energy efficiency upgrades, we could save taxpayer money and put Delawareans to work. We started with our old city-county headquarters, a building constructed in the 70s, almost designed to be monumentally energy inefficient. As we audited it, the auditor was stunned at how energy inefficient it was. High ceilings, bad insulation, poorly sealed windows. So we overhauled it. We upgraded the lights, put in new energy management systems, replaced the boilers and chillers and cooling towers, and got that building up to Energy Star standards. Did a host of other things on a constrained budget. And it was a resounding and lasting success with improvements just to that one small building. The county saves $350,000 a year. And it will pay for itself over 15 years, and because of that success, the county's gone on to do retrofits to 20 more buildings. In total, providing work for more than 150 Delawareans and reducing emissions by 12 million pounds of carbon dioxide per year, the equivalent of taking 1,000 cars off the road. And those jobs, they can't be offshored. These are jobs for electricians, laborers, and sheet metal workers. These are good quality building trades jobs. They're also sustainable because as each contractor learns how to do an energy efficiency retrofit in one building, they can go on and do it for more. What I found out was that once folks understood the impact, once they saw the difference we could make in that county, it became an issue that transcended partisanship or political loyalties. And that should have been the case here if we had a healthy and functioning Senate, because this issue is no more partisan across the United States than it was in our county. It saved us money. It helped our environment. It put Delawareans to work, and that same is true for the Shaheen-Portman bill that should be moving forward today. Earlier this year, I had a chance to visit Dover Air Force Base, our largest military facility in Delaware, and see what the U.S. military is doing to use less energy and employ alternative energy solutions. They've made dramatic progress looking across every corner of that base to reduce their energy use and to be more efficient in how they transport material for the United States Air Force. These are real ideas and real technology-based solutions that could be applied nationally. There's companies up and down our state in the private sector which have applied the same approach, the same initiative this bill would take, and seen real savings. Hirsch Industries, PPG, Kraft, AstraZeneca, all have realized savings of hundreds of thousands of dollars that add to their balance sheet and their bottom line. This bill, Mr. President, has been scored as creating 136,000 new jobs by 2025, saving consumers $13 billion and nearly 3 billion megawatt hours by 2030. In total, this is exactly the sort of bill we should be moving to, exactly the sort of bill we should be coming together to pass. Instead, sadly, what I'm hearing is that it is likely that the partisanship of this chamber is going to defeat our opportunity to take up and consider this important, balanced, and bipartisan bill. Americans are looking to us to take action to create jobs, save them money, and build a better future for that country. This bill genuinely gives us a chance to do all of those things. I am a proud co-sponsor of this bill. I had hoped to have a chance to debate, discuss, and vote on many amendments directly relevant to this bill that deal with energy efficiency and would strengthen it. Instead, it seems we are again mired in partisanship as folks here seek to add to this bill amendments utterly irrelevant to the core of what should be the focus today, helping to create high-quality jobs for Americans, improve our environment, and add to our nation's bottom line on this common-sense matter. It is my hope, Mr. President, that we can get past the partisanship and back to the real work our constituents expect and demand of us in the weeks ahead. With that, I yield the floor.
Well, thank you, Mr. President.
The senator from Oklahoma.
When we're establishing our time, I say to my good friend and colleague from California, I was joking around a little bit about the 9.5 minutes. Is it all right if I make that 19.5 minutes maximum?
No, because I say to my friend, I was promised to be able to speak at 3:30. So I'm already giving up so much time. So if you could just take 9.5.
Okay, I would do that, and I ask them unanimous consent at the conclusion of the remarks of the senator from California that I be recognized for 15 minutes.
All right, and I would say I would ask to be recognized for 15 minutes before you.
Is there objection? Without objection, so ordered.
See, 9.5 minutes. You got to help me with that, Mr. President. We. First of all, I wasn't going to do this since my good friend from California is on the floor and it's our favorite subject to talk about. I thought I would. I'd like to take the opportunity to talk about the first round of the major global warming regulations the President is set to release this week. Now, these rules will govern the amount of carbon dioxide that can be emitted from power plants, and they are the first round of rules following the President's major speech on global warming in June. The rules represent the most aggressive representation of the war on fossil fuels that we've seen in this administration, and we've seen a lot of them. We know that the rules will require any coal-fired plant to have carbon capture and sequestration technology. That's CSS technology. And while the Clean Air Act only allows feasible technology to be mandated, the CCS technology is not feasible. It's really not there yet. No power plant has ever been built with the technology unless it has been supported by massive taxpayer subsidies. The rule would kill the coal power plant industry. And while the rules may be constructed in a way that allows natural gas-fired power plants to meet the mandates, we have to know that that's coming next. After all, natural gas is a fossil fuel as well. And there have been several statements of people saying, well, just wait around until fossil fuel, that's going to be next. The only thing that these new rules would do is cause energy prices to skyrocket, and I expect the rule to be one of the key issues covered by the media this week. And while the exact details of the rule won't be known until it's published later this week, there are a few things that we do know right now. First, the science behind the global warming is now more uncertain than ever. Just last week, this is the first time this has been recognized. I talked about this morning in our hearing. Just last week, it was reported all over the media. The Telegraph, this is in London, one of their largest publications, The Guardian, also in London, the Wall Street Journal, and others, that this year there has been a 60% more ice coverage in the Arctic than there was this time last year. Now, you might remember the hysterical people were saying at one time that there would be no longer an ice cap by 2013. So instead, we find out it's actually increased by 60%. And this is equivalent of almost 1 million square miles is being observed before the winter refreeze and is even to be set in again. Now, what makes it more interesting is that 2007, the BBC reported that global warming would leave the entire Arctic ice free by the summer of 2013. The scientists who made this claim, Professor Weinstock Maslevich, said in typical bravado, we've come to expect from the climate scientists that this is not a cycle, not just a fluctuation. In the end, it will all just melt away suddenly. That's 2013. Well, here we are, 2013, and guess what? They're wrong again. There's 60% more ice than there was this time last year. A lot of the yachts and the ships expected to use the Northwest Passage. They can't use the Northwest Passage. It's closed because of the ice that is there. This follows reports earlier this year, notably from The Economist, showing that global warming has been on a pause for the last 15 years. The Economist wrote, and I quote, "Over the last 15 years, air temperatures and the Earth's surface have been flat while greenhouse gas emissions have continued to soar. The UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change did not expect this development to occur, nor did its models predict that there would be a 15-year stall in global warming." Professor Anastasios Sanis at the University of Wisconsin recently concluded, quote, "We are already in a cooling trend, which I think will continue for the next 15 years at least. There is no doubt the warning of the 1980s and 1990s warming has stopped. This reminds me of all the hysteria in the 1970s. The global warming trend is coming." You know, I can't tell you how many times on the Senate floor I've talked about how these cycles come and they go about every 25 years, and here it is, right on schedule, going into a cooling period. You know, starting back in 1895, every 15 to 20 years. They started out with a new ice ages coming. Everyone was hysterical. Then in 2007, 1970, it was 1919, they went into a period of warming, and then in 1995, or 1945, they went into another cooling spell, and that happened to coincide with the year that had the greatest surge in CO2 on our planet. So I only want to say that this finally has come to our attention, that we are looking at a situation that is quite different than we have seen in the past. And I mentioned that later in this month, the long-awaited event is going to happen. It comes up every 5, 6, or 7 years. That's when the IPCC comes with its assessment. And this just came up. I saw it's dated today in the Wall Street Journal, and I'll read this. It said, later this month, a long-awaited event that has happened in 2007 will reoccur. Like a returning comet. It will have taken to portend anonymous happenings. I refer to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change 5th assessment. Now, that's what we're talking about. And they go on to say they have learned from some leaks of what's in that assessment. There have already been leaks, I'm reading now, from this 31-page document which summarizes 1,914 pages of specific discussion. But thanks to the senior climate scientists, I have had a glimpse of the key prediction at the heart of this document. Keep in mind, this is the IPCC. This is the United Nations. The big news is that for the first time since these reports started coming out in 1990, the new one dials back the alarm. It states that the temperatures rise we can expect as a result of man-made emissions from carbon dioxide is lower than the IPCC expected. This is something that we didn't anticipate would happen just as recently as just a few days ago. I would just real quickly, it's my hope that we get to some of these amendments, and I'm going to mention one that is very, very significant. The amendment a few months ago, when we were debating the continuing resolution, the Senate adopted Amendment number 29, which prohibited the EPA from enforcing the Spill Prevention, Containment, and Countermeasure Rule. That's the SPCC rule. We all remember that they were going to put this, enforce this against farmers. The reason we did this is clear. EPA first threatened to enforce this rule against farmers at the beginning of the Obama administration, but they did very little outreach. Most farmers don't even know, even today, about this rule or what they would have to do to comply. The only reason other members know about this rule is because of the work that Senator Pryor and I have done to highlight the problem for what it is. This rule was originally drafted for compliance by major handlers of oil refineries, pipelines, players like the ones that are shown on Chart 1. This chart actually is Cushing, Oklahoma. Cushing, Oklahoma, which is a major hub of oil pipelines. Millions of barrels are transported through the stored in this small town each day. It's incredibly important that the handlers of the oil follow appropriate regulations to make sure that accidents don't cause significant environmental damage. They understand why the regulations are in place, and they follow the rules with precision. Now, we're talking about the people in the adjoining towns. But now, these refineries and the tank operators who is designed for in the first place, that makes sense. But now the EPA wants to enforce that against farmers. Now, what would it look like if we did this? First, take a look at this chart, number 2. This is a diesel fuel container on a farm. It's small, it doesn't hold that much fuel, but right now it is the subject of the same regulations that you'd have for oil companies and refineries. I asked a friend of mine, Keith Kissling, a wheat farmer in western Oklahoma, what it would take for him to comply with this rule that was designed for refineries. He said, first, I have to purchase a new double-walled container that would cost thousands of dollars. The EPA justifies this by saying that it would prevent leaks. Now, Keith, like all other farmers I know in Oklahoma, thinks diesel is expensive. So Keith is not going to let his tanks leak, whatever kind it is. I mean, just sit on a farm and realize that's leaking money, and obviously they don't want to do that. The next thing he'd have to do was build a berm all the way around his tank to contain a spill if all of the diesel fuel came out of it. This would be expensive and difficult to operate.
Senator's time has expired.
I would ask unanimous consent if I could have just 3 more minutes.